Chapter 1. Berlin wakes up in the 1800s. The first light of dawn slowly crept over Berlin, casting pale shadows across cobblestone streets still damp from the night's chill. In the early 1800s, the city did not wake with noise and chaos as modern capitals do today. Instead, Berlin stirred quietly, like a disciplined soldier rising before the trumpet call. Wooden shutters opened one by one, smoke drifted gently from chimneys, and the sound of iron horseshoes striking stone echoed through narrow streets. This was Berlin under Prussian rule, orderly, controlled, and serious. The city was not yet the sprawling metropolis it would one day become. Its streets were tighter, its buildings lower, and its skyline dominated by church towers, government structures, and military barracks. Horse-drawn carriages moved slowly through the morning fog, carrying officials, merchants, and messengers who already seemed to walk with purpose. Discipline was not just a military concept here. It was a way of life. As the sun rose higher, Berlin revealed its character. Soldiers in dark Prussian uniforms marched in precise formations, their boots hitting the ground in perfect rhythm. Military presence was everywhere. On street corners, near government buildings, and along the main roads. Even civilians moved with a quiet awareness of authority. In Berlin, order was seen as strength, and strength was survival. Shopkeepers began arranging their goods behind wooden counters. Bakers pulled fresh loaves from brick ovens, the smell of bread mixing with coal smoke in the cold air. Markets slowly filled with farmers from nearby villages, bringing vegetables, meat, and grain into the heart of the city. Coins exchanged hands quickly, and conversations remained short and practical. This was not a city of loud laughter or careless living. Berlin valued efficiency above all. Homes reflected the same mindset. Many families lived in modest stone or timber houses, often shared by several generations. Wealthier citizens occupied larger residences closer to administrative centers, while laborers and craftsmen lived in cramped quarters on the city's edges. Yet despite these differences, everyone shared the same rhythm: wake early, work hard, obey the rules. Berlin in the 1800s was a city shaped by ambition. Prussia was rising, determined to strengthen itself against rivals across Europe, and Berlin stood at the center of this transformation. Government officials moved between offices, drafting policies and orders that would shape not just the city, but the future of an entire region. Education was encouraged, but always in service of the state. Loyalty was rewarded. Disobedience was remembered. The streets themselves told stories. Stone walls bore marks of past conflicts, reminders that peace here was never guaranteed. Guard posts stood watch even during calm mornings, their presence both reassuring and intimidating. Children learned early to lower their voices near soldiers, to step aside for officers, to respect the invisible lines of authority drawn across daily life. Yet beneath this controlled surface, Berlin was alive with quiet hope. Artisans dreamed of better opportunities. Students whispered about new ideas spreading across Europe. Merchants imagined expanding trade beyond the city's gates. The world was changing, and though Berlin resisted chaos, it could not stop progress. As morning fully arrived, church bells rang across the city, their deep tones echoing through streets and courtyards. The sound marked not just the passing of time, but the beginning of another disciplined day. Berlin had awakened, steady, watchful, and preparing for a century that would reshape it forever. This was not a city rushing toward the future. It was a city marching toward it, step by measured step. Chapter 2. Streets, Markets, and Daily Struggles. As the morning settled into full daylight, Berlin's streets grew busier, revealing the true heartbeat of the city, its people. Away from the orderly government buildings and guarded avenues, everyday life unfolded in narrow lanes where ambition met survival. This was where Berlin's soul lived, far from polished offices and military drills. The working class formed the backbone of the city. Laborers, craftsmen, and apprentices filled the streets early, their hands rough and clothes worn from long hours of work. Men carried tools slung over their shoulders, while women balanced baskets filled with bread, vegetables, or laundry bound for the riverbanks. Children followed closely behind, some already working despite their young age, others learning trades by watching and listening in silence. Markets were the city's loudest spaces. Wooden stalls lined public squares, their owners shouting prices and praising the quality of their goods. Farmers from surrounding countryside arrived before dawn, bringing potatoes, cabbage, grain, eggs, and cuts of meat wrapped in cloth. Bargaining was sharp and quick. Every coin mattered. For many families, one poor market day could mean hunger by nightfall. The contrast between wealth and poverty was impossible to ignore. Well-dressed citizens passed through markets without stopping, escorted by servants or drivers, while beggars waited near corners, hoping for a spare coin. Some bore scars from factory accidents or past wars. Others were elderly, abandoned by a society that valued productivity above compassion. Berlin respected order, but mercy was often in short supply. Housing reflected this divide. In wealthier districts, tall townhouses with clean stone facades stood proudly along wider streets. Inside, families enjoyed heated rooms, private courtyards, and servants to manage daily chores. But just a short walk away, entire families crowded into dark, damp apartments. Shared rooms, poor ventilation, and limited sanitation were common. Disease spread easily, and doctors were expensive luxuries few could afford. Work dominated every aspect of life. Craftsmen spent long hours in workshops filled with dust, heat, and constant noise. Blacksmiths hammered iron until sparks filled the air. Tailors stitched endlessly by candlelight. Dock workers hauled heavy cargo along the river, their bodies breaking down long before old age. There were no safety laws, no guaranteed wages, and no protection for the injured. Food was simple and repetitive. Bread, potatoes, and soup formed the basis of most meals. Meat was a rare treat, often reserved for holidays or special occasions. Hunger was not constant for everyone, but it was always close. A silent threat lurking behind every failed harvest or lost job. Despite hardship, community mattered. Neighbors shared news, warned each other of inspections or tax collectors, and sometimes helped when illness struck. Taverns became gathering places where workers exchanged stories, complaints, and rumors about the future. These spaces were loud, smoky, and full of tension, but also hope. Whispers of change drifted through conversations, carried from other European cities where ideas about rights, labor, and reform were beginning to spread. Children grew up fast in Berlin. Education existed, but many families needed income more than learning. Those who attended school were taught discipline first, knowledge second. Obedience was praised. Questioning authority was not. As evening approached, exhaustion settled over the city. Streets emptied slowly as workers returned home, muscles aching and spirits worn thin. Lanterns flickered to life, casting long shadows across walls stained by time. Berlin did not rest easily. Even at night it remained alert, aware that survival required constant effort. This was daily life in 1800s Berlin. Not romantic, not gentle, but resilient. A city carried forward by ordinary people, each step heavy with struggle, yet moving steadily into a future none of them could fully see. Chapter 3. Berlin under Prussian rule. In 19th century Berlin, power was not hidden behind palace walls. It walked openly through the streets. The Prussian state did not merely govern the city, it shaped its behavior, its silence, and even its dreams. Authority here was visible, audible, and unavoidable. Soldiers were the most striking symbol of control. Dressed in dark, rigid uniforms, they stood guard at gates, marched through avenues, and trained in open squares where civilians could not help but watch. Their movements were precise, almost mechanical, reflecting a system that valued obedience above individuality. Children learned early to recognize ranks, to step aside, and to keep their eyes lowered. Respect for the uniform was not optional, it was survival. Berlin was the heart of Prussia's military ambition. Orders flowed outward from government buildings like arteries, reaching distant provinces and borderlands. Officers walked with confidence, their posture straight, their presence commanding immediate attention. The city existed in service of the state, and the state existed for strength. Law was strict and punishment swift. Minor offenses could lead to heavy fines, public humiliation, or imprisonment. Authorities believed fear maintained order, and order ensured stability. Courts were formal and unforgiving. A citizen's reputation mattered deeply, and once damaged, it could be impossible to restore. Berlin remembered everything. Surveillance was subtle but constant. Informants blended into daily life, neighbors, shopkeepers, even tavern patrons. Political discussion was dangerous. People spoke carefully, choosing words that revealed nothing. Revolutionary ideas drifting in from France and other parts of Europe were known, but rarely voiced aloud. Walls had ears, and Berlin was listening. Education reflected the same values. Schools emphasized discipline, punctuality, and loyalty to the state. History lessons praised military victories and national pride. Students were taught not to challenge authority, but to serve it. Teachers enforced rules strictly, believing structure created strong citizens. Creativity existed, but only within boundaries. Religion also played a role in reinforcing order. Churches preached obedience, duty, and sacrifice. Faith was encouraged as a stabilizing force, a way to keep society unified and compliant. Sermons often aligned closely with state interests, reminding citizens that loyalty to authority was not just political, but moral. Yet power came at a cost. The pressure to conform weighed heavily on the population. Individual ambition was permitted only when it aligned with state goals. Artists, writers, and thinkers navigated a delicate balance, expressing ideas carefully to avoid suspicion. Innovation was welcomed, but dissent was not. For many Berliners, the military offered one of the few paths to social mobility. Uniform could elevate a poor family's status, bringing respect and financial stability. Young men joined willingly, seeing service as both duty and opportunity. The army became a ladder, harsh, dangerous, but reliable. The city itself mirrored this hierarchy. Wide avenues led to government buildings and parade grounds designed for visibility and control. Narrower streets housed those with less power, hidden from official view. Architecture was not accidental, it was a statement. Despite this rigid system, tension simmered beneath the surface. Economic hardship, inequality, and exposure to new ideas slowly chipped away at unquestioned loyalty. Some citizens began to wonder whether order alone was enough, whether discipline could replace freedom. These thoughts remained quiet, shared only in trusted circles. As night fell over Berlin, soldiers still stood watch, lanterns glowing beside them. The city slept under the protection and pressure of Prussian authority. This was a place where strength defined identity, where power shaped every corner of life. Berlin did not rebel in the 1800s. It waited. Chapter 4. Industry, Smoke, and a City in Transition. As the 1800s progressed, Berlin began to change in ways no marching army ever could have achieved. The sound of boots on stone was slowly joined by the rhythm of machines. Industry arrived quietly at first, then all at once, reshaping the city's landscape, its air, and the lives of its people. Factories rose along the edges of Berlin like iron giants. Brick buildings with tall chimneys replaced open land and old workshops. Smoke poured into the sky, darkening it even on clear days. The smell of coal became permanent, settling into clothing, homes, and lungs. This was the price of progress, and Berlin paid it without hesitation. The Industrial Revolution transformed work completely. Where craftsmen once shaped goods by hand, machines now worked endlessly, demanding speed instead of skill. Men, women, and even children crowded factory floors from dawn until night. Shifts stretched long, wages stayed low, and breaks were rare. Time itself seemed controlled by the factory whistle, not the sun. Railways carved through the city, connecting Berlin to distant regions. Trains brought raw materials in and carried finished goods out, accelerating reopening Berlin into a growing industrial network. Stations buzzed with activity, porters shouting, engines hissing, crowds moving with urgency. Travel that once took days now took hours. The world felt closer, faster, and more demanding. With industry came opportunity, but also suffering. Thousands migrated from rural villages, drawn by promises of steady work. They arrived hopeful, only to find overcrowded housing and harsh conditions. Entire families packed into single rooms near factories, sharing walls thin enough to hear every cough, argument, and cry. Disease spread quickly. Clean water was scarce. Sanitation lagged far behind growth. Berlin expanded outward rapidly, but planning struggled to keep pace. New neighborhoods appeared almost overnight, built cheaply and quickly. Streets filled with carts, wagons, and workers heading to factories before sunrise. At night, gas lamps illuminated smoky roads, casting eerie glows through polluted air. The city no longer slept deeply. It hummed. Yet not all changes were grim. A new middle class began to emerge. Factory managers, engineers, clerks, and merchants who benefited from industrial growth. They lived more comfortably, embraced modern ideas, and believed technology represented the future. For them, Berlin was becoming a city of progress and promise. Tension grew between old traditions and new realities. Elder craftsmen struggled to compete with machines. Communities once built around guilds and family trades weakened. Pride in skill gave way to fear of replacement. The city's identity shifted, slowly but permanently. Workers began to notice their shared struggles. Though still cautious under Prussian authority, they talked, quietly at first, about rights, hours, and wages. Taverns and boarding houses became spaces where exhaustion turned into frustration. These conversations did not yet explode into action, but the seeds were planted. The skyline itself told the story. Church towers that once dominated the horizon now competed with factory chimneys. Smoke replaced bells as the city's most constant signal. Berlin was no longer just a political and military center. It was becoming an industrial force. By the late 1800s, the transformation was undeniable. The city had crossed a line it could not return from. Industry had bound Berlin to the future, whether its people were ready or not. This was a city standing between two worlds, one rooted in discipline and tradition, the other driven by machines and momentum. And as Berlin pushed forward, it carried both the hope of progress and the weight of everything it had lost. Chapter 5. Cafes, Culture, and the Mind of Berlin. While factories roared and soldiers marched, another Berlin quietly took shape. One built not from brick or iron, but from ideas. Beneath the strict discipline of Prussian rule and the relentless pace of industry, the city's intellectual and cultural life began to awaken. This Berlin did not shout. It whispered, debated, and questioned, often behind closed doors. Cafes became the heart of this softer world. Tucked along busy streets or hidden in side alleys, these spaces offered warmth, conversation, and escape. Writers, students, teachers, and clerks gathered around wooden tables stained by time. Coffee cups steamed as voices rose and fell in thoughtful discussion. Here, people spoke more freely than they ever would in public squares, though still with caution. Education played a central role in shaping this intellectual atmosphere. Berlin's schools and universities gained reputation across Europe, attracting thinkers interested in philosophy, science, and law. Classrooms were strict, but minds were curious. Students absorbed new ideas about society, reason, and human progress. Books passed from hand to hand, their pages worn from secret readings and quiet reflection. Music and theater offered another form of expression. Concert halls filled with orchestral performances that reflected both discipline and emotion. Theaters staged dramas that explored morality, ambition, and conflict, themes deeply familiar to Berliners. Though performances often avoided direct political criticism, audiences understood the deeper meanings hidden within stories and characters. Art in Berlin during the 1800s was restrained but purposeful. Painters and sculptors focused on realism, capturing daily life, labor, and the dignity of ordinary people. These works did not glorify excess. Instead, they reflected the city's serious nature, its focus on effort, structure, and responsibility. Beauty existed, but it was controlled. The rise of the middle class further fueled cultural growth. With increased stability came curiosity. Families attended lectures, visited galleries, and encouraged education. Reading became a sign of respectability. Knowledge was power, not in rebellion, but in preparation. Yet even in this world of ideas, fear remained. Prussian surveillance did not disappear at cafe doors. Writers chose words carefully. Philosophers framed arguments in abstract terms. Open criticism of authority could still destroy careers or lives. Intellectual freedom existed, but only within carefully maintained boundaries. Despite these limits, the city's mind was expanding. Berliners were becoming more aware of Europe beyond their borders. News of revolutions, reforms, and social movements elsewhere sparked curiosity. While Berlin did not rush toward radical change, it observed, analyzed, and waited. Evenings brought moments of reflection, streets filled with citizens returning from lectures, concerts, or long conversations. Gas lamps flickered, casting soft light over faces deep in thought. The city felt calmer here, less rigid, more human. This intellectual Berlin did not overthrow governments or lead uprisings. Instead, it prepared the ground. Ideas formed slowly, layering one upon another, shaping how future generations would think, question, and act. By the end of the 1800s, Berlin was no longer just a city of soldiers and machines. It had become a city of minds, disciplined, cautious, but increasingly aware of its own complexity. The thoughts born in cafes and classrooms would not remain there forever. They would move outward, quietly, influencing a future Berlin was not yet ready to face. Chapter 6. The Berlin that stood on the edge of the future. By the closing decades of the 1800s, Berlin no longer resembled the city that had quietly awakened at the century's beginning. The narrow streets of early Prussian order had expanded into wide avenues filled with movement, ambition, and tension. The city stood taller now, louder, heavier, and more confident, yet deeply unsettled beneath its progress. Berlin had grown into the political and industrial heart of a newly unified Germany. Flags flew proudly from buildings, and national pride filled public spaces. Parades marched through streets designed for power and visibility, celebrating strength, unity, and purpose. To the outside world, Berlin appeared disciplined, modern, and unstoppable. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. The working class, shaped by decades of factory labor, had changed. They were no longer silent individuals struggling alone. Shared hardship had forged shared awareness. Though still constrained by authority, workers began to recognize their collective strength. Conversations about labor rights, fairness, and dignity grew more frequent, still cautious, but impossible to erase. Industry continued to dominate the skyline. Smoke rose endlessly from chimneys, darkening the sky that once reflected church bells and quiet mornings. Technology advanced rapidly, bringing efficiency and expansion, but also deepening inequality. Wealth concentrated upward, while the lower classes carried the physical cost of progress. Berlin's streets reflected this divide. Elegant boulevards and government districts stood polished and proud, while overcrowded neighborhoods remained hidden behind them. The city had learned how to present power, even as it struggled to manage the consequences of growth. The military presence never faded. Prussian discipline had not weakened, it had evolved. Uniforms remained symbols of order and pride, but they now carried the weight of expectation. Strength was no longer just about defense. It was about identity. Berlin believed in itself, perhaps too strongly. Culturally, the city had matured. Education, science, philosophy, and art flourished within structured boundaries. Berlin's thinkers shaped ideas that would echo far beyond cafes and classrooms. The city had become a place where minds were trained to analyze, plan, and lead. These qualities would soon influence the course of European history. Yet there was an unease in the air, a sense that everything was moving too fast. Change had accelerated beyond tradition's ability to guide it. National pride risked becoming arrogance, discipline risked becoming rigidity, progress risked becoming obsession. As the century came to an end, Berlin stood at a crossroads. It had all the tools of a modern power: industry, unity, education, and strength. What it lacked was certainty. The future promised greatness, but it also whispered warnings. The calm of the 1800s masked the storms ahead. The 20th century waited just beyond the horizon, carrying conflict, ideology, and transformation on a scale Berlin could not yet imagine. The same streets that now echoed with ambition would one day witness upheaval that reshaped the world. Berlin did not see that future clearly. It only felt its approach. As night fell over the city, gas lamps illuminated avenues lined with stone and steel. Trains roared in the distance. Factories continued their endless work. Soldiers stood watch. Thinkers reflected. Workers rested. Berlin had become everything it worked to be: disciplined, powerful, modern. What it would become next was still unwritten. If you enjoyed this journey through Berlin's past and want to walk through more forgotten streets of history, make sure to subscribe. History isn't just dates and names. It's cities, people, and choices that shaped the world we live in today.